Paul, thank you very much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you. And obviously, we're recording here in the afternoon in German time, and it's the morning in Detroit. Welcome to the show, and thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Martin. It's really nice to be here or to be chatting with you.
Now, we when we had a little bit of a pre-chat and we were discussing what kind of topic we wanted to discuss about. I had this a little bit of a, let's say, aggressive kind of proposal, and I said, why don't we talk about the fact that you work in education, and do we think that car designers in the future actually design cars? And you said, hey, that sounds really interesting. So here we are with that. But my first question to you is actually more related to a little bit of your background, because you have experience, quite a lot of experience actually, as a teacher, as a professor at the Pratt Institute, at CCS now in Detroit, of course, as well. But also, you have been extremely hands-on in your past as well. So you're not just this typical professor who's never done it, never worked in the industry before. Over the past, let's say, 5 to 10 years, when you moved from the industry back into education, was obviously also the time where UX came into play very much. Interior design was more and more important. What was the observation that you had that affected you the most in your education, or how did it change your perception of education with these changes coming in, that, let's say, an exterior is not the most important one anymore, but there's other ones that other areas that are now coming into this educational area?
Well, that's a really interesting question. It makes me think in terms of one of the most impactful experiences. It probably was going to graduate school in New York. When I was teaching car design at Pratt Institute, I was also for at least 1 year at the same time finishing up graduate school in New York City in fine art. When you study fine art, like an MFA, at many schools, you get into a lot of critical theory, literary theory, the politics of art making are core and extremely fundamental to the creation of culture. So, excuse me. So all these notions of divining meaning out of what we do, whether you're writing a story or a text or designing a car, are pushed to the forefront, and deciding exactly who your audience is and what you're trying to say um, becomes a critical factor in art making. And that was something in my BFA in transportation design that we never really covered. It was all about the craft primarily. I mean, in a 4-year degree, you're going to cover some psychology, you're going to cover some philosophy, but it's all very sort of introductory, unless you're going into a liberal arts degree. But a bachelor of fine arts or a bachelor of science is really about the profession that you want to be in. And as we all know, you really don't need a graduate degree in order to be a car designer, right? You need a smoking hot portfolio and a passion for it. And usually 4 years is enough to get you there. So putting all this together, what I uncovered, uh, or discovered, as it were, was, for example, the notions of deconstruction. Like, what was that all about? Um, and and how was that? Where did that originate from? And it wasn't an architectural movement at first. It was really a way of understanding a text. And that kind of blew my mind, because when you start to deconstruct what we do as designers, whether it be a car designer or a product designer, you start to think about the meaning behind your craft or your work. And so when I come back to teaching now, I think in the context of the 21st century and this kind of liberal democracy that seems to be struggling right now, but basically it's the best answer we have as a species to move forward. Liberal democracy with capitalism is the order of the day. So if we start to talk about emotional design and car design, and we start to talk about how so much design is superfluous and just sort of void of meaning, then we're talking about styling. But when we start to talking about making the world a better place, and then we start to talk about design. In terms of transportation design, you know, the distinction between automotive design and product design, they used to be part of the same department, right? Industrial design. But as so many professions have become more and more specialized, where you really drill down into one particular aspect of a field, they sort of grew apart. And there's certainly still an arrogance amongst transportation designers or car designers that, and I'm guilty of that as well. I think that car designers can design anything. But what I try to do now is instill in my students that starting with the human user and making the world a better place is really what's going to give you meaning in your life as a car designer. And that might sound very profound and very highfalutin, but yeah, I think it's a pretty core lesson to be learned from humanism in general, that we're not just here to create landfill of the future, but at the same time, human beings will always have a propensity to choose between their favorite whatever and somebody else's, right? Whether that be the red pickup or the black pickup, it may be the choice to drive an economy car or a luxury car. So choice is what's always going to keep us employed, and taste. And whether or not we're designing cars, I think is really it's a question of how do you define a car? Is a car something that has to have a steering wheel? And when that goes away, are we still car designers, or are we designers of spaces that move? So what my approach to transportation design at CCS is, it's anything that moves. So it may be a robot, it may be a jet ski, it may be a truck, and it may be a sports car. And I think in approaching it that way, you're going back to the fundamentals of the design process, which is, you start out with a discovery mission. It's like, what's out there, and you try and identify new human needs or problems that can be solved. And so that's problem definition after you've discovered a lot of things, um, and opportunities, and then you develop and deliver it. So in the definition of your problem lies usually a human need or a pain point that can be solved for. And if it's if that human need is a toaster, then it's a product design. If a human need is something that moves, then it's transportation design. So car design, you know, guys like um, my my friend Chris Bangle, who was at CCS a couple of years ago, he's trying to elevate car design to some other category of culture making. and that's cool. We can talk about how designers are more skilled in one thing than the other because we do drill down into aesthetics so thoroughly, the understanding of proportions and beauty, probably more than most product design um, departments and institutions. Um, so, but that doesn't negate the fact that we're still designing things that need to work. So it really goes back to the form and the function and which one leads. But the distinction between, what we call ourselves now and historically and what we're calling ourselves in the future, I think is kind of a moot point, because what we need to be doing is just making the world a better place, and enjoying ourselves along the way. And it comes down to, first it's got to work, and then, you know, what color do you want?